All right.
Yeah.
Elke, you want to say something just so we know we can hear you?
Nope.
Sorry, did you
Yep.
ask a question?
Oh, I just wanted you to say something so I knew we could hear you.
Okay, I can hear. I'm here. Hello.
Cool. Great.
Hi. Here.
All right, we can start.
Excellent.
Are we live?
Yeah.
Adrian, we're live?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to our second Dialogue with Dignity event. My name is Matt and I am hosting it. This is being organized by Changing Our Consciousness, which you can find out more about at changingourconsciousness.org. So we are here today to, in simplest terms, talk about what we believe we know about the world and why. We obviously live in a time of incredible political divisiveness, and there are many reasons for that. I think the biggest factor by far, however, is the distorting effects of media in the digital age. According to census estimates, somewhere between 80 and 90% of Americans have home internet access. The remaining gap is probably closed somewhat by phone and community internet access. And even without the internet, television news networks are still available pretty much nationwide, as they have been for decades. So many things are unevenly distributed across our economy and our geography, but information access is really not. And this kind of equal access to information is really unprecedented in human history. So while we might rationally assume it will have an overwhelmingly positive impact, there is no roadmap to tell us how to handle this new reality. And it seems, I dare say, that things are not working quite the way tech entrepreneurs predicted they would back in the early 2000s. Or if we can just index web pages and videos and articles and make the index searchable, if we can just connect everyone in a social network, everything will be better in the future, as our species routinely promises. Now, I'm going to share a bias here, and I hope it'll be the only one that I betray in my capacity as host slash facilitator slash moderator, whatever I am. But I have to, because this whole thing is ultimately based on a premise. That is that I believe very few of us are monsters. The divisions in our society are often characterized as being purely ideological. We just believe in different things. Generally speaking, I believe in liberal democratic principles of freedom and justice and equal participation. You believe in fascism or communism, or you possess some less conscious form of bigotry. All that is to say that our divisions are rooted in different ideas of what is right and what is wrong. And I mostly disagree with this. I think the problem is more to do with what we think we know. So there's no more clear example of this than the election. There are people on both sides who sincerely believe that the other side has either orchestrated or attempted to orchestrate a coup d'etat, either by storming the Capitol or rigging the election. As in the first time, we've had a fundamental disagreement on who was trying to overthrow the constitutional republic and replace it with some authoritarian thing. It's been going on for at least 4 years and really a lot longer. Now, we're not necessarily here to figure out if anyone is right or wrong. I should say correct or incorrect. We're here to discuss why this chasm exists. And I want to be very clear that the reason we are trying to create this non-confrontational setting is not that I believe that our only salvation will come from holding hands and singing and learning to love one another. That's often how these sorts of things are portrayed, as fiddling while the world burns. But problems only get solved when you take a scientific approach to them. So I want to look at concrete examples of information asymmetry across the political spectrum. Do people actually see completely different versions of the same events? How are they able to do this? What are the determining factors in what people see? And the confirmation biases that can cause us to select certain sources of information can be deeply rooted in our experiences. So I really encourage our panelists to get as personal as they are comfortable being. So now that I've laid out the grand ambitions, and we'll get to all of this over the course of not just today, but next Sunday as well, I want to start by just getting to know each other, where we stand, where we come from, how we got here. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now. We can just go around and say everyone's name and what you do with most of your time, if you would like to share, or what you used to do, or what you would like to do. And if you want to plug anything that you're doing, you can feel free to do that. So let's start with, start from the bottom, Elke.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Elke. Don't worry about mispronouncing my name. I'm
sorry, Elk?
very used to it. Nope, it's not that either.
Oh.
It's Elke.
Elke, okay.
And I always say that I don't even really know how to pronounce it because it's a German name and it has this German sound at the end of it that American English does not. And so it's really something like Elke. I can't do it. But yeah, hi, I'm Elke. About me, gosh. So I am in Seattle, I'll say that. I'm from Connecticut. And as soon as I say Connecticut, I have to say I'm in Red Sox territory, from east of the river and from Manchester, Connecticut. And what about me? Okay, so I decided when I was 26 to get on a plane and move to Seattle. That was in 2010, just after the recession. I have a degree in anthropology from the University of Connecticut. And I've been struggling to make that into a how should I say, a livable wage. But I feel like I'm now at this point where I'm good. So now I work for a legal administration company. I've gone from an assistant project manager to an actual project manager in the last year. So now, I don't know, that's me. I'm a little secure in my life. I'm like happily midpoint here where I'm good. And let me get political here, I guess, because that's the point, right, Matt? I should. Oh my gosh, I can't do this with my. Okay, one more time. Can you say something, Matt? Oh shoot, I think I screwed something up because now I can't hear you guys.
Matt, you're unmuted.
Okay, there we go.
Matt is muted, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So about me.
I was muted too.
You were muted. Okay. All right. Okay. Now we're having a conversation. So I'm just supposed to talk about my politics.
We'll get to that in a moment. For now, we're just gonna go do basic introductions.
Okay, that's my basic introduction.
Cool.
I'm in. I like it here.
Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan. Born and raised in New York City, specifically the Bronx. About the age of 18, at the age of 18, signed up for the Marine Corps. Wanted to see the world. In doing so, I had to leave a lot of preconceived notions behind, mainly what other people were, what they did, who they were, just in general. And I got to meet a lot of very interesting people. Well, I never went overseas because I got out before Desert Storm, Desert Shield occurred. I did meet tons of people from the Carolinas, both North and South, all over California. used to hang out in Mexico all the time, every other weekend, which was awesome experience because it was quite fun. Yeah, so when I came back to New York, I got to start seeing things that people I grew up with didn't get right because they had no personal experience sitting down across the table with somebody, even if you disagreed with them. You had to sit across the table with them because we all worked together, and you found out, wow, these people are just like me. Just they have different food. Well, let me say, barbecue in Carolinas, awesome. Thank you. But yeah, so now I'm back in New York after a bunch of time. So, anything else you want to know, Matt? Or you got to turn back on the.
I'm going to do that a lot. Sean?
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Again, I'm from the Bronx also, and I know Jay, we talked last week, also from the Bronx, so it seems like we're kind of dominating the group here. I'm retired right now. I retired in the end of 2012 after 35 years with the government. I also had 3 years of active duty with the U.S. Army. I enlisted back in late 73, right after Vietnam was closing down. I thought it was a safe time to go into the service after we got out of a conflict. So I did 18 months in Thailand overseas. So that was an experience at 18 years old. Single in Thailand was an experience. But again, the military service was an education in itself, similar to Dan, getting a chance to meet different people from all over the country, a very diverse group, obviously. And then living in a foreign country with a completely different culture from the Bronx to northern Thailand was an experience and real eye opener. And it had an impact on my life moving forward from that. Because after I got out of the military, I got a job with the government working with U.S. Customs, where I spent 35 years. And of course, being in law enforcement, that also influenced and shaped my political views as well. So I'm married, I have 2 grown children, one's 30, one's 37. We have 2 grandchildren and a third one due in April. So we're keeping busy with those kids as well. And my daughter is up in Connecticut, Elka, and she went to Eastern Connecticut University right next door to UConn. So
Okay, yeah. I
that's
grew up in Wellington, yeah. So I know ECSU.
Okay, yeah. So that's it for me in a nutshell.
All right. Jay?
Okay, my non-political bona fides. I guess we're now tilting the screen from to Yankee fans from Red Sox fans. And I spent the ages 7 to 22 in the West Bronx. So we're also really stacking the deck here. I live in Toronto. I've lived in New York, in the Midwest, in New England, and in Israel. So I've moved around. I have been in Toronto since 1988. My initial career was as an academic. And then, I left Wisconsin out of there, sorry. Then when I came here to Toronto, most of my career has been in the nonprofit sector, and that's affected, I think, my worldview a lot. Another thing that's affected my worldview a lot is, I would say, both being Jewish and being the child of people one way or another who experienced the Holocaust. I think that's given me a particular lens. And Elka, anybody from my generation, any red blood male would remember Elka Summer. So, who I don't know if you know, but so we have no problem with your first name.
Yeah, I know. Elkie Summers, yes.
Matt, you're still muted.
Okay, Alice?
I think we're gonna have to start lip reading to just understand Matt.
Yeah.
I just keep it on because I don't know how to mute and unmute.
I guess
Anyway, hi, I'm Alice. I've been a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst in Manhattan for about 45 years. And always Manhattan, got as far as the Bronx for medical school. And I sort of catapulted into medical school from the feminist revolution. You know, went from an all-girls Catholic high school where you could be like 7 different things, you know, a housewife and then a nun, a secretary, a librarian, a nurse. And I went to Barnard, and lo and behold, I could be a doctor. And then Einstein, I think it was the year when they went from 10% women to 33% women. So I just sort of rode the wave and wound up there. And then I got there and said, what in God's name am I doing there? And wound up being fascinated by psychiatry, just the way the mind worked. The Freudian model was the thing at the time, except for the major mental illnesses. And I was absolutely fascinated by the unconscious forces and just the idea of how we got to be who we are. I should say that this overall umbrella project is my brainchild. It's been around for about 10 years. And we've birthed a number of different projects. This is the latest. I'm excited about it. We started out with a dialogue project that was purely on the internet. This was the beginning of the internet era. But we called it Waging Dialogue, which is pretty much what it was. People just attack each other. And it just became very clear that the disembodied, anonymous, dehumanized arena of the internet, you were not going to be able to bridge a divide. So I sort of moved that over to my personal Facebook page and then did some other projects. One of them, very pleased with, we designed an emotional literacy curricula for middle and high school students. And I was able to design it and teach it for 5 years in this wonderful after school program. And we came out of that with a number of curriculum designs with 2 videos where our students interviewed Vamek Vulcan and Lord Alderdice, 2 major figures in the field of political dialogue. And they co-wrote a book, which you can find on divides.org. They wrote a book with students from another high school in the city. So they got very into it. The kids were very excited at the idea that sort of understanding how the human mind works and figuring out ways to empathize with people. So I really think if this could catch hold, something could catch hold, I think the young people would take it and run with it. I also, in collaboration with the Hot Stove Project, co-developed 2 mental health documentaries designed to destigmatize mental illness, including the complications of people within the mental health field, because we fight with ourselves, and that gets in the way of addressing stigma. Other projects, I wrote a book, I'm doing some other things. But this project I'm excited about because it's a return to the original Waging Dialogue. But with the new technology, we can see each other face to face. Just this conversation where we can humanize each other, I think goes a long way in understanding just who you are, how you got to be who you are, how you think politically arises out of that. And maybe we can actually get somewhere by alternating in-person and email and social media, and see if we can come up with some ways of imagining solutions rather than just continuing to criticize each other for the sin of being different.
All right.
Right.
So we're going to have 2 rounds of going around and answering a set of questions. And then we'll have a 3rd round of sort of open dialogue. We've got 5 people and 3 rounds, so we can say about, try to do about 5 minutes each. I mean, it doesn't have to be super strict, but I'm not going to cut anyone off unless you're writing a novel. So, all right. So the first question is place yourself on the political spectrum using any words or labels that you choose. Have your positions been fairly consistent, or have they evolved over time? What influences do you credit for your positions? Family, peer group, community, your occupation, significant life events and experiences, also media influences. We can look at this as a chicken and egg question, whether your beliefs shape where you look for information, or is it more the other way around, and it's just what you stumble on that shapes what you believe. So we can explore that. So you can answer any way that you want, share anything you want. Again, I encourage you to be as personal as you can be. If you need to pause and think, it's fine. Again, we have plenty of time. And 1 million people are not going to watch this, so don't feel you have to be perfect. And since I was going to say we should all mute ourselves when we're not talking to minimize ambient noise, but clearly that's not a great solution for me. So we don't have a lot of ambient noise, so I think we're okay. But obviously, you know, if a fire truck comes by you, maybe click that button. So let's see. Would anyone in particular like to go first? Jay, go for it.
Yeah, also, I just forgot to add that my main activity right now, I've been reviving my poetry writing practice from the mid-90s. And so that's occupying most of my time these days and has saved me, to be honest. In terms of the questions, the label I'm most comfortable with is probably progressive politically. I think it's been pretty consistent. Yeah, pretty consistent since maybe teenagehood. I think the key influences, I think I touched on before, which is, I would say, certain Jewish values, especially as I've developed and as I've studied more and as I've gotten deeper dives into that world. They've only tended to reinforce that. I can talk some more about that if it's appropriate. So I think that that's certainly in terms of my community and to some extent my occupation. Family is interesting because I would say my family was kind of split politically, especially when you look at, let's say, Israeli politics, which is partly their origin as adults. My father actually fought in a very right-wing underground militia that got a certain amount of infamy. And on my mother's side, her brother was sort of on the more what we would call left side. As a kid, I think I was very hyper aware of Israel, things like that. And I actually participated in both in terms of like youth movements and things like that. I sort of tasted both sides. In one movement, I remember we practiced how to lock arms when you're at a sit-in and the cops want to break it up. And this was especially around certain things like the struggle for Soviet Jewry and stuff like that. So I think I've always been very politically oriented. I was part of the anti-war movement as a college student, which dates me, I know. Yeah, and I think that's been another aspect. I've been pretty active. This last presidential election, I was volunteering quite a bit, both in terms of texting and phoning and stuff like that. I am a citizen actually of 3 countries, although I can remotely only vote in 2. Let's see, in terms of media, I definitely think it's more and more these days a selection rather than causation. I think we tend to gravitate towards media that you can either say reinforces our beliefs or that we trust. I would say from my perspective, the the source that I most consistently listen to is the PBS NewsHour, which I think is pretty fair. I think all media is biased. I think the difference is how transparent they are about it and how much they have checks and balances in place to do fact checking and stuff. And in fact, we may get into this, but there are sources on the internet, Media Matters, some other sources that you can actually check, and they will give you ratings both in terms of bias and sort of fact checking. The bias doesn't affect me as much because it's fine. I know there's, that some are lean left, some lean right, whatever. I just want to know so that I can evaluate the information. And then secondly, I would say the real issue is how the issue of veracity. And two last things. I just want to pick up on two things that have been said so far, if that's okay. One, in terms of Alice's point, I am not a sanguine about this notion of humanizing, because some of my main issues, really, really tough issues, are the people I know well. And the fact that I know them well has not affected how I feel about them, their politics, and how that affects me and how I feel about them, which I think we could probably get into later. And the second thing is, I don't know if Matt met this in his introduction, but I'm also wary of what I would call false equivalences. From my point of view, it sounded like you were making an equivalence in terms of people who believe the election was stolen versus people who believe that there were people trying to overturn the election. And to me, simply on a fact basis, I don't think those are equivalences at all. I think this notion that has survived numerous court cases and all kinds of stuff that the election was stolen is a canard. On the other hand, I do think there was a definite pattern, both in terms of political leadership and what happened on January 6th, to actually intimidate the process. So I don't think they're equivalent.
Well, I would say, just in response to that, I'm not really trying to draw equivalences. I'm simply trying to say that there is this enormous gap in what people think is true. So I think, again, I don't want to get too much into the politics just yet, but really what I'm trying to say is very simply that I think that I don't think that people on either side realize just how much the other side has access to completely different set of facts. So so when you say that you don't want to draw a false equivalence, I can understand you there. And I agree that at face value, those things are not equivalent. But I think that what I'm trying to get at is how we see things from such different angles that the way you just portrayed it isn't how the other side even thinks that it is.
No, fair. I got that, and fair enough. I guess the ultimate $64,000 question is, can there be arbiters?
That's an interesting question. Does anyone want to go next?
I don't mind going. Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, doesn't matter. I guess to get to the first question, to try and label myself in somewhere on the spectrum, it's kind of hard for me to do. I find it myself in a box in one particular issue. I guess it depends on the issue is really the way I stand. And that might sound like flip-flopping because, I have friends that are very conservative who think my views are liberal. And I have friends that are very liberal who think I'm conservative. So I would think that puts me somewhere in the middle and as a moderate, if I have to put a label on myself. And it really does depend on the issue because I look at each issue independently. Something like gun control, I'm very, it surprises people coming from law enforcement that I'm strongly against or so I'm strongly for gun control. I think there's a problem in this country with guns. I just, but the perception that people have of me is that I should have a conservative view on that particular issue. And then you go to other issues like immigration. Working from a law enforcement agency that worked on the border, you would think that I would be very strong on, strong immigration laws and strong on border security and those types of issues. Well, I look at both sides of the issues. And so I tend to, people that only see it one way tend to see me as being liberal on those issues. When I'm not really liberal, I'm just being fair. And that's the way I view it. So I try to get as much information on any one issue and look at both sides and then try and form my own opinions on it. So have my positions have they been consistent? No, obviously they change as I got older. I can go back to my teenage years when I was 16, 17 years old. I remember being very conservative, going back to the Vietnam era, Jay referred to with the anti-war protests and all that. I was on the other side of the spectrum. I was with the hard hats. I was with America, for America, back the president, right or wrong, that kind of attitude, behind the flag and all that stuff. And, 16, 17 years old, coming from, and then I'm going to lead into, this is all going to bleed into what influences you to believe those things. And so I came from a conservative family, an Irish Catholic background. My father was an immigrant who came here in the late 40s and worked, civil service job, worked hard, worked overtime, and Irish Catholic, we kind of had these views that were kind of follow the Pope and those trickled down to the children. We came from a big family, we had 7 children in our family. So we were strict Irish Catholics. And then I grew up in the neighborhood in the North Bronx, in the Woodlawn section of the Bronx. It wasn't considered very diverse. It was an Irish Catholic enclave, and it still is today. And so we were kind of sheltered to those very narrow views. And so those things, affected your views as you grew up. And then I guess as I got older and got more exposure to the outside world, as I consider it, and my views expanded, I got to meet other people from different cultures. And then I started understanding that, there's other things in the world. And then as I grew older, through my work experiences, those things also influence what you did. I was fortunate enough during my government career to have the opportunity to travel. We did a lot of foreign travel. I've been to over 50 different countries working alongside people. And so all of that experience really changed and influenced my views, not just, things like social justice or civil justice and those things that I was very conservative at one time earlier on in my life. I am now a much more liberal, especially now that I'm in my retirement years. My views have changed again. So they've evolved over time, depending on what the issues are and where you're standing in life and what you see, what's best for your country, what's best for your family. That's who I think about most of the time is my children and their children and my grandchildren growing up in this country, that you want the best for them. And that's what drives my thoughts and formulates my opinions. So that pretty much covers those 3 questions in part 1. I don't know if I've answered it, and if we have questions or you want to talk about it later, we can do that.
Yeah. That's fine. We're only getting started, so don't worry about it. All right. Where are we? Anyone want to go next?
I'll go next.
Okay.
Right. I've. It's kind of funny with me. Over the years, a lot of people they'll look at me and can't place me, or they automatically think I'm one way or another, minus the beard with the beard. I'm kind of mixed background, so and I'm also mixed religiously. Half my family is Roman Catholic, the other half are Protestants, born again Christian Protestants, and I was raised from the age of 1 year old as a Jehovah's Witness. So when I hit about 16 and I started doing what all 16-year-olds do, start questioning, which does not bode well for any faith or system of thinking, which eventually led me looking back at some of the people who I respected, some of my school teachers I really respected, and I went into the military. So with that being said, I socially, I am more liberal on my views on social items. On political and economics, I'm very conservative. And it usually comes down to a point where I sit and talk with somebody to find out their viewpoints and say, hey, why do you believe this, or why do you think this way about me? And to figure out, what's going on. And I may change my viewpoint at that point. Sometimes not. We both go away, maybe not enemies, but we go away, at least better understanding each other. So I've never really changed my moral compass. So on certain social things over the years, I've changed positions on certain social items. But to go with the hard hat, wrap yourself in a flag. Yeah, that was me for many years. I believed in the country. Do I have that same strong ethic about the nation as an ideology any longer? Maybe not. But I do respect, the things that got put there before me. But on the social side of things, made me question a lot of things over the years. And I looked across the table and I found, Sean, as you were saying, like with social justice and everything, and Alice, you were saying about with coming from like a strong feminist background of Catholicism. The majority of the women in my family during the 1960s all had masters or above. They owned businesses. They were very intelligent women. So today when I hear somebody saying that they're oppressed, I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I could point out to like 5 women in my family who all have like double masters, who've owned businesses since the 60s. And nobody tells them what to do. Nobody. And it's kind of funny. It was like, so. And so when people say, well, you're very conservative, I'm like, no, you just could look back at my family and say, no, I'm not really, because I'm not that as conservative as you think, but I'm not as liberal as everybody believes I should be. So, anything else? Yeah, with the media, just I guess to hit on the last point with the media, I think it is a chicken or egg thing for me. Every once in a while I look and I'm like, I'll see something and then I'll have to go out on my own and either ask somebody who was there at the event or at the situation, or ask people from that background. I'm like, is this true? Did this happen? The way that it's being portrayed to me. Because I'll give you one specific example. Here, when I was in the military, there was a situation that happened in Northern California. Berkeley law students. There was a big protest. It was June 6, 1987. A lot of protesters, a lot of Berkeley law students, predecessors, I guess we would call them, like, today we would call them Antifa. But yeah, they're the ones who wanted to cause trouble. And what got put in the press versus what actually happened there, two totally different things. Two totally different things. And the funniest point is, the one who gave the most clear, accurate description of what occurred was Playboy. Playboy magazine actually gave the clearest representation of what occurred that day, with that summer. The local news didn't. The local newspapers didn't. We weren't allowed to look at Playboy or Penthouse on base. That was totally forbidden. But when we found out what the article was, we actually read it and we're like, oh yeah, this is exactly what happened. We knew everybody that was there. They named names and people. And I was like, wow, wait a second. How is Playboy giving a better representation of the course of events throughout that summer than all the local newspapers and television stations? It spoke a lot to me, especially I was 18 years old at the time. And I've carried things like that over, where I don't trust the mainstream press to always give the most accurate description. Anything else you want me to touch on, Matt?
No, I think that was a good answer.
Okay.
Elke?
Sure. Let's see. So as far as, can you guys hear me okay? Is everything coming through? Okay, cool.
Yep.
So ways I would label myself, words that I have labeled myself with, or assume that other people have labeled me as. Liberal, bleeding heart, liberal, feminazi, radical, feminist. Yeah, like I am and I think the way that I got here was pretty unique. So I've got my two sides of the family, which is the only time you'll ever hear me say that, because it's like, really, I just have my mom's family. Swedish immigrants got here 100 years ago, Republicans in Connecticut. And but then there's my dad, and he is from Germany. My mom was one of 6 kids, and she was like the weirdo, like, beloved, like strange child. So like my mom, out of the siblings, kind of got this like pass to be a weirdo, because like she just was so cute. She played the flute, and she got a degree in flute playing, and she married a man that she found in the streets of Paris and took him home. So when I place myself in my family, that's how I do it, is out of the siblings, my mom had 5 siblings. I mean, the rest of them were very like Republican. There's the military, there's nurses, there's federal workers on my mom's side of the family. But me and my siblings, we grew up with my German father, who always was pointing out how well organized and how things make sense in other places, i.e. Germany, where they know how to do things like build roads and stuff like that. So always I had this, and of course I would say it's part of the white culture, is like to not talk about things. So it was never discussed. I mean, I just realized within the last like 2 years of my life that my dad is a feminist. Okay. Like I never thought of him as a feminist until more recently. And I was like, oh my God, my dad is such a feminist, but I was never told that, and in the same way, like as a kid, the Republican Democrat discussion it was never out loud. Like we had all these family gatherings and all these like, I mean, you know, I have my Uncle Mark who is God, if he ever watches this, I'm sorry, Uncle Mark, I love you so much. You can't tell him anything. And he knows that. And that's like a feature of our family, you know, is like Uncle Mark watches Fox News and we just don't talk about politics with Uncle Mark because it's just it's like turning on Fox News. It's not a conversation. It's watching a talking head. So that's me. I think it's like my Republican family like watched me grow into a Democrat and they never really said anything. And then like, you know, then I started saying things like Black Lives Matter and and now it's an issue and now we're all divided. And I mean, my favorite aunt is married. She married a chief of police in her 50s, so like later on marriage. And that's how I found out I'm a bleeding heart liberal, is because I really have a hard time with Uncle Rudy and his career as a chief of police and all the things that I know he did outside of Chicago in like a wealthy suburb of Chicago. Like as I left. I live in Seattle now. I love where I live. Antifa is something that I'm like so deeply proud of, the fact that I now identify with this city, and my city has this incredible history of protest and you know, hitting the streets and the Antifa, and like I am like, wow, like I'm so inspired by those people. So that's me politically. As far as how I got that way, I would definitely say it's like big family events, you know, like my straddling the Atlantic. Also, so I yeah, right, like my family's Republican, but my mom was like the beloved weirdo, and they were like, oh, she's like a Democrat and it's weird, but it's cute, you know, like I don't know, like it was like fine. And then also I moved, this was a big deal, when I was 10 years old, my family moved. And so my early childhood was spent in this very white town, Wellington, Yukon. Like literally there were 2 Black students in the entire school system, and neither of them were in my grade. So when I was 10, all of a sudden my life moved from this like very white town to Manchester, Connecticut, which is 10 miles outside of Hartford. It's incredibly diverse. I mean, it was literally like 30% African American, 30% Hispanic, 30% white, and 10% Asian. Like it was so diverse. So my life, that was a huge shift for me. I grew up in the seat of privilege, you know, next to these girls who are taking horseback riding lessons and stuff. And then all of a sudden, when I was 10, my worldview became very different. And I realized how lucky I was. And I realized how different my life was. And I realized what it was to be connected to services, you know, like there was a Planned Parenthood down the street from my house, like right there. It took me a while to get the context of realizing like there are women who there isn't a Planned Parenthood for like 600 miles, you know, and these are my fellow citizens. And so that was another big thing, was the move when I was 10 years old from this very white bubble place to somewhere where the whole world was on show, you know, like it was not a secret what the rest of the world lived like. We were all on top of each other, and I think that definitely generated some strong feelings in me about what's right and what should be the way it is. And, you know, if I could grow up that way, why can't everybody else grow up that way? Blah, blah, blah kind of stuff. So that was my child brain development that put me where I'm at now. So yeah, that's me. My political views and why I think I became so adamantly the way that I am.
Alice.
Okay, I came from a background that was very insular Catholic, you know, 12 years of Catholic school. You know, when I got to Barnard, it was from a position of, it was obvious that, you know, you had to go to heaven, and abortion was wrong and homosexuality was a perversion, and, you know, sex was what it was. And then I woke up the year after the '68 riots at Columbia with, you know, the Vietnam, the make love, not war, the, you know, sex, love, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And what, you know, it really felt like an alternate reality. So of course I majored in math and pre-med and graduated in 3 years so I could hide out. And then I wound up in Albert Einstein Medical School, which was affiliated with Yeshiva University. So suddenly I was Jewish at the same time. So it was multiple sort of shocks to my system. I loved it because the questions led me to my field. And then, you know, I've spent 45 years talking to individual people, and they're all different. And I get where they're coming from. So I can't take a clear position where this is right and this is wrong, because it's right for this person and wrong for that person. And this person is defensive, and, you know, this rich person, yes, maybe he deserves it, or maybe he wants to hold on to it. This poor person, maybe they deserve it, or maybe they're milking the system. All of those, the questions everybody accuses each other of, come alive in individual moments with me. So, and I always feel like I love my patients. I get them. I try my best to understand them. But I worry that if they were in a room together, they'd kill each other. They're just coming from different centers. That's a big part of how I came to be where I am. Right now, I like to think of myself as having two eyes that give you, you know, perspective and clarity and depth perception if they focus. You know, my dominant is left, but if I close my left eye, I can see out of my right pretty well. Not as well as the left, but I can see it. And my Facebook friends, my patients, the people who challenged me every step of the way have helped me see beyond the prejudices. And there's so much of, oh, you know, you think this, you're a white supremacist. You think this, you're a bleeding heart. You think this, you're a libtard or a Nazi, or that makes me crazy, because the nuances of how people come to believe what they believe is really important. And we're not going to be able to solve the problem if we keep labeling each other. So anyway, my political, I would say that, you know, I'm right-handed, my left eye is dominant, my left, politically, but I get where the right is coming from much of the time. And I'm grateful to my patients and my Facebook friends for pushing me to see something I wasn't able to see before. That's...
All right. So this was the question for the second round. I'm just going to read it. What are your main news sources and how did you find them? Do you distinguish between news and commentary? How do you parse, trust, and verify these sources? Do you get confirmation from your peer group? Do you make an effort to seek alternatives? Now, some of you have answered all or part of this question to some degree. Some of you haven't. Thinking back to the exchange that Jay, you and I had earlier, I'm thinking that I want to maybe be a little bit more specific. So without putting anyone on the spot, I'm going to ask, so what are your main news sources? How did you find them? Do you distinguish between news and commentary? How do you parse, trust, and verify these sources? If you trust your sources, maybe there are times when you think you're being misled. And you can feel free to share those experiences, and even if you do you make an effort to seek alternatives. And if you feel comfortable, nobody has to answer. I want to put forward 4 specific examples, and you can say, because it seems like this is a pretty politically informed group, you can say how you found out about these situations, and so where did you learn about these situations, and where did you get your detailed information? Where did you get your commentary on these situations? And the 4 situations would be the 4 situations would be the Capitol riot, the Black Lives Matter protests over the summer, the first impeachment of Donald Trump, and although it was they're somewhat two separate issues, but the Russia collusion investigation. And if you can remember that far back, it's been a million years, the Clinton email scandal. So if you want to dive into those scenarios, feel free. If there's another example where you would rather shove in, feel free as well. Jay, you want to go first?
Sure. I do think I covered some of that, and I want to elaborate on the thing you didn't mention, which I think is the most interesting one. In terms of my sources, it's basically NPR and probably MSNBC. I understand that there's bias. I got that at a very early age. I mentioned earlier I was part of the Vietnam stuff, and I remember being in a demonstration at Queens College where I was very active. And then that night I watched Walter Cronkite, who deservedly so is sort of an icon of probity. And and they reported on what happened at Queens College, and I'm thinking, that's not what happened. And I'm thinking, if they can't get it right going across the East River, can they get it right going across the Pacific to Vietnam? So very early on, I had a certain kind of inoculation, but my sources are pretty consistent. I think the interesting question that you didn't focus on so much is, and this is something I want to talk about because it concerns me even about myself, which is, do you make an effort to seek alternatives? And I have to say now, absolutely no. And that's a cause of concern for me. And it's, I'd like to say, oh yeah, I look at everything with a fresh eye and I look for, no, I don't. I think I've reached the point, I feel like I've crossed a line, and that concerns me. So, talk a little bit about my background. It's like growing up, if I would have met Elke's father's family, I would have said, oh, you're German? What were you doing in 1942? What was your family, right? And I had a really interesting change of heart based on, interestingly enough, a personal experience I had with a group of Christian Germans who I met in Israel, who were touring Israel, and I met them at Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum there, which is kind of interesting. And they were all from the SPD party, which is the socialist party in Germany, and they were all adults during the war, but because of their politics, they were pretty not participants. So that taught me not to assume, right? But unfortunately, when I hear somebody say, oh, well, I take it issue by issue, I go simply, okay, who did you vote for in the last election? Do you watch Fox or do you watch MSNBC? And I do immediately pinhole those people. And the line I've crossed, again, I feel like I'm this super Jew here or whatever. There's a great scene in Fiddler on the Roof, which by now, it's like the #1 play in Japan. I mean, it's pretty universal. And the protagonist, Tevye, constantly has these conversations with God, which is a very sweet little, he has these dialogues with God. And then, and he has this one stratagem where it's on one hand, on the other hand, and he's talking about the fact that I think it's when his daughter ran off with a Christian Russian soldier, and he's like talking to God. He goes, well, on the one hand, and then he stops, and he literally slaps his hand and says, there is no other hand. And I'm afraid I've gotten to that point. I'm afraid that I've gotten to that point where I just don't see the legitimacy of another hand. I just see the forces of greed, of oppression, of political power, of all kinds of things, so lining up on one side that it's hard for me to feel compassion or try to seek out the views of those that I feel are on the other side. And I'm not happy about that. And I'll just end with one of the most profound statements I heard a number of years ago about this, because I've lived long enough to see it evolve, where you'd have a discussion and at the end of the process, you'd say, okay, we agree to disagree, or I'm right and you're wrong. But today it's I'm right and you're bad. And that concerns me. It really does. But I don't see a way out of it. And, and it feels like I've crossed over that line.
Just out of curiosity, so you mentioned that your concerns about not making an effort to seek alternatives, and I assume you're talking particularly about opinions. I'm just wondering about, so I think you got into this a little bit before. As far as fact checking goes, when you fact check, do you have certain, I know some of this is going to be a restatement for you. Do you have certain places you go for fact checking? And do you assume that those places always have it right based on history? Do you ever feel inclined to find alternatives? And is that part of what concerns you?
That's fair. I think the answer to the last thing is yes, it does concern me, even in my own behavior. But it's been, as Alice would say, it's been habituation. It's been, I have checking into it, and it's like fairly consistent, you know. Breitbart is like out on Mars, and the New York Times doesn't always get it right, but I can trust it much more. So I do have a topology in my mind of just on the face of it, who I believe and who I don't. But, you know, it's now come out that, I don't remember if it was the Times, it was apparently the horrible situation where the Capitol Police guy was killed. Apparently, the fact that he was hit over the head with a fire extinguisher may not be correct. Now, was he hit over the head with a flagpole, whatever? Actually, I'm not sure that makes a difference. But yeah, nobody's got it perfect. But I'm also more confident on some of those institutions that have what I would call a professional standards of journalism to, in fact, admit they're wrong, have retractions, try to do fact checking before they publish stuff. Are they 100% right? No. Do they have a bias? Yes. I also tend to think that they keep a better line between opinion and facts, right? And that often that bias comes out in the commentary, and I can live with that, just as I can live with that on, you know, with the Wall Street Journal or something. So I think, to me, the litmus test is that firewall between news and opinion. And I do think, based on my experience, that some sources do a much more consistently better job of that than others.
All right, anyone want to go next?
Feel like talking.
Okay.
Okay, my main news sources have changed over the years, right? Kind of would split it up between pre and post internet. Like, I remember cable news being really confusing as a kid. It was all out of context. I could not figure out what was actually happening. It seemed like there were important things happening, but they were, I used to feel like, what is, you know, this alphabet soup of 3-word acronyms? Like, what can we, like, maybe talk about those things? You know, like, I felt like as a young person that there was a lot going over my head. Then with the internet, it was all social media, and it was all, it focused to like streamers, you know, and like first person accounts of actual events, right? So when you talk about like what was my main news source for Black Lives Matter, I would definitely say my social media chorus of activists. Now, saying that, I mean, one of those people is somebody I used to work with. She's like a coworker, you know. I have met these people through various ways, you know, but these are real people in my life. I didn't like find them on a comment thread, like, you know, the social media accounts that I subscribe to always begin for me with a connection to a real person in my life. So, you know, whether it's like my friend Gozer, she is of Laotian descent, but very much American. Like, she's cued me into, you know, Asian American justice news sources. I had a friend in college who had one foot in Palestine and one foot in Connecticut. Now he's more one foot in New York. But he cued me into, you know, like what I would see as like boots on the ground journalism, like actual people with a device. So for me, and that change happened when I was in college and I was studying anthropology, and I was all about what is a primary source. and why is a primary source so much different than a secondary source. So yeah, very vocal on social media because I felt like I'm looking at primary sources and you're looking at secondary sources and I'm right and you have no idea. That's how I would describe my interaction with news and commentary. Get right in there. As far as I wanted to say, Jay was mentioning the New York Times and stuff, and as far as news sources, I mean, I'm an avid reader. I didn't have TV when I was a kid, and my parents did that on purpose, and I read a lot of books. And so I think because of that, I was able to distinguish between a voice, like I had read books and different authors and I knew what a voice was. And so I could distinguish on the news when I heard, like I would say I love the New York Times too, but oh my God, some of their headlines, they are super judgy. And I know that because I have a grip on language and I can tell when they are making their position on the issue into the news. But I'm like, no, New York Times, that's your opinion of what happened. I saw in social media last summer, screenshots of right-wing news sources showing, clips of the BLM protests happening, quote unquote. They're saying, this is what's happening in Seattle. Oh my God, look at this photo of the streets on fire. And there's, burning everything. And there's a guy in a black sweatshirt and he has an AK-47. And really, it's a shot from Minneapolis. Like it was not, that shot didn't even happen in Seattle. Nothing was ever on fire in Seattle. Like the 3rd precinct got completely doused in fire retardants. And then people from both sides, depending on what day of the week it was, were defending the 3rd precinct in Capitol Hill. Okay. Like everyone was all like, nobody's going to be the bad guy here. Nobody is burning down the police station. And from what I saw from my social media news sources, there were times when both Proud Boys were defending the precinct. And then there were times where Black Lives Matter was defending the precinct because they're like, nobody's burning down this precinct. So that's my experiences of news sources and local events. The Capitol riot, I was working and looking at Facebook, and one of my high school classmates posted, turn on your TV right now. Like to turn it, and when you see that, you're like, oh my God, what the hell is happening? And then I sat and I watched Reuters. I have like internet TV now. So I use the Reuters app and I choose whether I want to watch 10, 15, or 30 minutes of news. And Reuters, I think, does a pretty good job of staying dry, really dry. I like the language that Reuters uses. So that's my news source. The rest of it to me is commentary and opinions and manipulative behavior designed to increase your ad revenue. So that's, Hillary email scandals. I'd say all these things lump into my social media consumption, where I will be going through my feed and I will see I'll be cued into the story. Then I read about the story from however it comes at me, conversation in a bar, or, you know, a headline on the Seattle Times as I'm walking past it. Yeah, I watch Reuters. I mean, if I'm turning on, like, I mean, even CNN, to me, Rachel Maddow, they're all guilty of like just blowing shit up into this ad revenue increasing rhetoric. So that's my, yeah.
Interesting that I didn't even really think about this, but one important factor in how you judge what you see can certainly be things that you actually see. So for instance, you actually being in Seattle and seeing what happened there, I tend to forget that there is such a thing as a real world.
Yeah, I had 2 experiences where I was commuting home from work on a bus, and I'm stuck in traffic, and I'm like, what is going on? You know, you're like waiting and the light cycle changes and you're not moving. And I got off the bus and I put my boots on the street and I joined the protest. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, oh, I'm in the wrong place. I need to go be over on that side of the sidewalk. Like, and then, you know, like I joined the protest that is organized. I mean, in Seattle, the downtown area is very small and well trod. As far as protest goes, it is a predictable point. Like they've got it down to a science here. You know, we know exactly what's happening. Okay, there's a protest, and you know why there's a protest, because Freddie Gray and all the other names that, you know, I don't have memorized, but feel strongly about. Yeah.
Who wants to go next?
I go, Sean, or you want me to go?
Sure, I'll go.
All right, Sean.
Okay.
Listening to Jay, I see myself pretty much mirroring a lot of what Jay had to say. I agree a lot with, except I don't think I've gotten to that line yet, across that line that you mentioned. I think I'm still right around the line, sitting on the fence in the middle as usual. But I know where it is, and I think I'm consciously resisting crossing that line. I'm trying to make a good faith effort not to cross it, only trying to be open-minded as much as possible. And that's, I don't know how long that will last, but I'm trying. That's all I can do. And then, you know, other things come into play. I mean, I'm married. We're in the house together with no kids, no distractions. So my wife is very tuned into politics, and it's CNN and MSNBC. That's on pretty much all day long. And I get tired of listening to the same thing. So occasionally I'll get my hand on the remote and I can switch over to Fox, because not that I'm a fan of Hannity or any of those guys over there, but I want to see how they're covering the same story that's going on, the same issue that's there. I'm just curious to see. So when I get a chance to look, I'll go on, but I find myself trying to listen to it, and the time is getting shorter and shorter that I can stay with them, because I hear these facts that are just, as they call them, alternative facts. And you just shake your head and you say, this is just wrong. It's just wrong. And I can't stay with it too much. And I flip back. And that's the way I kind of go. And then that's as far as TV goes. But at least the internet, I feel like I have a little bit more control over it, because I customize my search engines and I get to view and read what I want to read. The sources are cited there, so you know what's coming at you, where it's coming from, what's behind the source, who owns the source. You know, if it's the Washington, it's Bezos and or the other guy, Murdoch, or, you know, back in the day, Roger Ayers, whoever it is. at least you knew what was coming at you and what was driving the message. And you knew how to filter it and process it. Well, what was the newspapers I pick up, you know, I still read newspapers, mostly for the sports sections more than anything else. You know, if I pick up the Daily News or the New York Post, it's local crime. Most of the paper is all about local stories, what's happening on the streets of New York City. And there might be a little bit about, you know, national politics, but I gravitate more towards the sports sections and then the crossword puzzles, anything else. They're not really newsworthy to me as far as, you know, politics goes and formulating opinions. I kind of scan over the editorial pages and you kind of know where they're going to go just by the fact that you bought the New York Post and the Daily News or the New York Times. You know where their stance is and what their stance is on most issues. So I don't have to waste my time reading it. That's the way I look at it. How do I distinguish between news and commentary? I do recognize the fact that, you know, all of these talking heads are just commentary. Although I do like when they bring in what I consider to be credible spokespersons on a panel, and somebody that doesn't have a skin in the game, somebody that has some past experience, that sheds some light on an issue, that brings some real facts to it. And those are the people that I feel like I can trust. I can trust that opinion because they're not on either side of it. They don't have anything to gain or lose. They're just giving you what they know is, and a lot of times they're on the inside on a lot of these issues, and they have connections and contacts from past experiences, and they'll bring that to light. Again, you have to take it with a grain of salt, depending on what it is that they're discussing, but at least it's not just, they're not being paid by the CNN or the MSNBC or the Fox group. For the most part, they're a guest speaker and they're there to give you some insight. Trust and verify these sources. Again, it's you know, you pretty much know where they're coming from as long as you're aware of the bias and you can filter it. Do you get confirmation from your peer group? You know, when I used to go to work, you know, every day you're riding around in a car or talking in the lunchroom with coworkers, and it doesn't take long to see where people, you know, where they land in the spectrum. So you can have a discussion and have some fun going back and forth, exchanging, you know, ideas and barbs and kicking things around, and trying to keep it civil without getting, you know, without going overboard and having some fun with it. That's the way, you know, we did it with our peer group. With social media, as far as things like Facebook and, you know, you got to take all that stuff with a grain of salt too. You know, social media, I find people will say things that they would never say to somebody's face on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or any of these other places where you're not having that face-to-face discussion. If even this Zoom concept here, where we're actually interacting with each other and we can see each other, we're respectful of each other's opinions. We would never say anything. But meanwhile, if we took all of these and blacked out all these squares and we were typing stuff, we might be more inclined to insult, not insult, but take a harsher stance than you would as if you were face to face with somebody. And I don't know why that is. It's just that the picture gives you and humanizes the person that you're communicating with, whereas opposed to just a text, you know, text message sent out, and somebody can just be nasty and it's anonymous and they can just say it's an outlet for people, I guess, that have that pent up aggression that they want to get out. And you have to understand that too. So that's another thing that I look at. Do I make an effort to seek alternatives? I'm always looking for alternatives, especially when there's a question. If there's an issue and it's unresolved. There's a question in my mind as to, well, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. Why is that? And I have to go on my own to try and determine or resolve that question until I get an answer. My curiosity, because when I hear something and it's inconsistent with what I believe, I have to go searching for the truth. And that's what the bottom line is. I look for the truth, and hopefully I find it. And sometimes I'm disappointed in the truth. Like you said, Jay mentioned the story about the Capitol police officer that was killed. Initially, all of the news outlets said that he was killed by a protester with a fire extinguisher. And now it's coming out that it might not be true. He might have had a stroke, I believe, a day or two after the incident. What caused the stroke, we don't know, but there's more to the story. And a couple of days later, there were some retractions and some clarification. Some news outlets have come to, bring it to light, bring the truth to light. And those are the ones that I look at to be more credible. When a news agency or a news outlet is willing to retract the story and admit that they made a mistake, or they made there's a problem with their fact checking, and they come out and they tell you that they're retracting something, that tells me that that's an agency or an outlet that I can trust. So that's my stance on that stuff.
All right. Dan or Alice? Dan, go for it.
All right. As far as my news media, where I get most of my news from, most of it is not American based. I will watch BBC, EU News, Sky News Australia. I want to see what the world says about us. I already know what we're saying about each other. I already know some of my friends are going to go more liberal side, other ones more conservative. And I try to find that third point of view. That lends back to one of my longest jobs. Well, one industry I worked in for the longest. I was an investigator for about like 14 years. And I came across, I was like, there's three sides to every story. Their side, your side, and their truth, because everybody has their own perspective. And it's kind of fun or interesting when you look at you're trying to vet eyewitnesses for a crime scene. They're highly unreliable, and they were there at this situation. You're going to have to put somebody up on a stand, and they were there, and they're unreliable because of whatever. They may have had a newspaper in front of them. They may have been looking some other way, not realizing, and they'll swear up and down that they saw something. So I'm looking at, I look at outside news sources. The ones that I listen to from inside the United States, more commentary based. But when I listen to give commentary, here I'll give an example. Tim Pool or Terrence Popp, they'll give. They're like, this is where I got my source from. Page 3 of the New York Times, or RT said this, or Reuters said that on page 5. And according to this author on this date, they'll state this. So I highly appreciate that that they're actually giving their opinions based on their source, and they'll share their source. And if I disagree with them, I could actually go look up the paper myself. And more times than not, they'll put down on the bottom, where you could actually look up their sources. Sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't, because I don't think they came up with the right conclusion. So I'll read the source myself, and I'm like, okay, now I see why they're saying what they're saying. Which okay. I like a lot of firsthand, even though it's unreliable a lot of times, I like a lot of firsthand information. I have a friend of mine who who's from Lebanon. He's Lebanese, but his family's from Lebanon, but he's here in the United States. He tells me he told me what was happening right after the election. After the election happened here in the United States, what was happening in Lebanon. Very interesting. I actually I met a couple of guys from Syria just after they got out of the country before Aleppo occurred. I think they missed the whole thing that happened with Aleppo by like 2 weeks. They left the country. So I have a tendency to go find people who like, hey, do you have relatives over there? What's happening? And they'll tell me, this is happening or that's happening. To speak to what Jay had said earlier, I know a lot of my friends, some of my friends who I've had for like 40 years, 45 years, they cease to look at the other option on the other side. And unfortunately, after this last election, they don't, just because we disagree, they've given up on long-term relationships. Guys who I was at their weddings or I was there when the kids were born, or we've known each other, and because you can see that they're following a certain narrative, they cease to cut out any or all things, because I must be, if I'm conservative in anything, then I must be conservative in everything. And I looked at them, I'm like, these are guys I grew up with, and they've just cut me out of their lives. I'm like, okay, I still make a concerted effort to expand my to find alternatives. One such example is before the lockdown, I actually took a train trip across country. Flew out to Salt Lake City, took the train all the way back to New York City. That's about 3 days and 18 hours. You got a lot of free time to think. And you go to observation car, there are Amish people there. Yeah, talk to some Amish people. You meet guys from Chicago, meet guys from Lincoln, Nebraska. I was like, why? We're all sitting in a train for 3 days. And wow, hey, you're eating that. Why do you like that? Or, hey guys, where you're from. And I found that it was truly refreshing. It puts a face on a person, and it makes both of us seem more human to the other person. When you take away that human face, Sean's very correct that people act out in really horrendous ways sometimes. I wasn't there during the early 70s in the military. I was there in the 80s, and I was still getting that in the 80s. So from the age of 18, dealing with protesters yelling at me, cursing me out, calling me baby killer at the age of 18, I'm like, dude, I just got into the Marine Corps like 6 months ago. And here we got, Berkeley law students yelling at me. Seriously? So that may be a little harsh, how they treated me, especially being 18 and them being much, much older in some cases. So it kind of colors the way I view certain news organizations, because of either being there at the specific site, like being at protests, breaking up protests, working on the side of law enforcement, or I got to see, so I try to find the alternatives and everything, because I know both sides aren't always correct. Anything else you want to?
No, Alice?
As you're talking, I'm thinking about a couple of my friends who are very much on the far right, and they may actually be listening now, so I'm sort of talking to them too. And they will say that Antifa organized this, or that the election was stolen and they needed to make a clear statement that Trump should be president. And you get a little weird because it feels so wrong. But the psychiatrist in me thinks, where's the way in which it's right? What are they trying? What do they need me to understand? What do they need us to understand? There's a lot of them. It's not like there's one delusional person or one, you just give somebody Zyprexa and it'll go away. There's a whole bunch of people who feel so strongly that something's wrong. And I want to hear that. And so I try to sort of not get caught up in, well, where's your documentation? And this news source said that this many people came from here and that person did that and that, because it's not going to convince people who really feel strongly that this has to be, on some level, it's true. So I tend to go to what we call psychic reality. There's factual reality and there's psychic reality. And if you believe something, again, I was raised Catholic. I was raised with Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And then I was raised Freudian, and it became id, ego, and superego. And you talk that language, and that was a fact, And then it was neurobiology, and it was serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine. Different arguments, and they're all metaphorical. They're all, magical and symbolic in some way, but they became real. So somehow how we can understand where people are coming from and know facts but without getting caught up in arguing facts. That happens on my page all the time. Somebody will present an article about something. Somebody else will say, oh, but you didn't read this, and this. And meanwhile, nobody's reading anything. We're just getting the flavor of the person who's talking. What do we do about it? I mean, how do we find truth out of all of this, truthiness and arguing what you believe to be true and finding evidence to document what you believe to be true or what you want to be true? I don't know.
So we've touched on a lot of the issues that we are going to get into next week when we get a little more into detail about how social media works and how it may be twisting our perceptions and how things have evolved over time. So this session, as I said, is really about getting to know each other, and that's a long process. So that's why we're spending the entire 2 hours on it, getting to know each other's positions and experiences, so that we have a basis to really get into the issue next time. So we have 20 minutes left, and I want to open it up to if anyone has questions for each other. Jay?
I've been taking notes, I've been listening, and yeah, things that people have said, I sort of either have touched me in a particular way or I need clarification. I really don't understand Alice's points at the end there because, not to oversimplify, but were I to hear when I hear those folks and talk and try to figure where, it's really easy for me. They're scared. They're scared of what's going on. And I get that. That doesn't necessarily help me come to a point, even where I can feel comfortable with them, or at least see their point. I found Elke's distinction. Well, first of all, Elke, the business about headlines is the bane of any journalist's existence, because the journalist writes the article and somebody else writes the headlines. And that really pisses most journalists off, because very often, actually, if you read the story, it doesn't necessarily deal with what's in the headline. And that's gotten worse now on the internet because there's clickbait, as you indicated, so that the headline people are trying to get you to click on the article and they sensationalize it or whatever. But I was really interested in your distinction between primary and secondary. Coming from a research background, I totally get it. on the other hand, to use, I think it was Sean's view of skin in the game and Danny's sense of, you know, unreliable witnesses, so to speak. I'm not sure that the distinction for me holds, because I do think that sometimes people closer to what's going on, you know, have agendas, have a way to, a narrative to interpret what's going on immediately. So to me, I think for me personally, the distinction more between some sense of professional discipline, some sense of, okay, this is the claim, let's try to figure it out, using some kind of tools, is to me more persuasive than just somebody who was actually there or has that direct experience. On the other hand, having said that, I ran for many years a charity that was Israel-based, but dealt with things like the rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel or other issues. And I got to know them and got to really see it from that perspective. And so that did inform me and change my mind to you, one of your first questions. And I think, and Danny kind of, to me, resonated when Danny talked about his own background and the women in his family, which is amazing. And I'm thinking, okay, what happened if those women were African American in the 60s, trying to do those very same things? So one of the big changes in me, and I think in a lot of people in the last year, if I think of something positive, is I think a light bulb turned on what white privilege really means. I don't think I really understood it. And there was that incredibly powerful testimony of one of the congressmen who, when the Capitol thing happened and he ran to hide or into one of the rooms and said, take your pins off because you don't want to be identified as Congress people, and realized all the people of color, that doesn't help them. You know, you can't suddenly paint yourself white. And so I do think that for me has been a big shift in my own understanding. And I think that's actually happened to a lot of white people. Finally, I think the light bulb has gone on into what some of the real deep issues are that are going on. I'm sorry, I feel like I've made speeches here. So,
does anyone want to respond or ask another question?
Well,
Okay.
I'd just like to do a little clarification. As far as the thing for white privilege, if they were African American, my family is from the Caribbean. English is not their first language. It's Hispanic, or they would be considered Hispanic or Latin. So, one of my grandmothers made it to the 3rd grade. Her husband, my grandfather, made it to the 6th grade. They're both my mother's parents. My grandfather made it to the 6th grade. At the age of, 18, he got married to my grandmother, who happened to be 15 at the time. Came to New York. They worked on a farm for a bunch of years in Puerto Rico, had 5 kids. Once the 5th one was born, they moved to New York City, where my grandfather, during the 1950s, worked as a delivery boy. He disdained, I always thought he was a chef. He was a delivery boy. He disdained that term. And he put 5 kids through school, bought houses, and he started flipping properties back in the 60s. In a time when a man who had rudimentary education could barely speak the language, he flourished. One of my uncles, one of his sons, my uncle, went into insurance and owns an insurance company. One was a pharmacist. The other one, he was a civil servant. Language and oppression, that's just part of the course for any immigrant. And they were like, oppression is oppression. And they're like, we don't care. We're here to make money. They looked and they're like, yeah, right, whatever. They're like, okay. And they ran with it. And my grandfather played up that aspect to no end. Example, my grandfather at one point, I believe he owned like 5 houses. He was already, he was in his late 50s. In the 1970s, he went to go New York City when we had that 5-cent bottle deposit kick in. He walked around as a homeless person picking up bottles and cans. Nobody ever knew anything my grandfather did. They never knew. My grandfather was making, before the term side hustle came across, my grandfather had multiple side hustles going on like that. And he, at the end of the day, when he went to go see his relatives back in Puerto Rico, buy a very nice suit, travel first class. People ask him, so what are you doing that you're so, you look so incredible? He says, I'm in glass and aluminum recycling. He didn't pick up glass. He didn't pick up bottles and cans. He was in glass and aluminum recycling. On the other side of my family, with my dad's parents, my grandmother spoke 3 languages. Her family was from Spain. They moved to Puerto Rico. She spoke English, Spanish, and Italian. And I believe she also spoke a little bit of French. I may be wrong on that one, but I knew she spoke 3 languages, highly educated. Telling her that she couldn't do something only spurred her to continue to do something. Nobody told them what to do. And language was also an issue, but especially being a woman at the time, they're like, so they did it in spite of. So there was no privilege on their part. They worked for everything they got and they earned it, and they were happy. I mean, they were a lot happier than I am.
That's not what privilege means, though, Danny. And immigrants have it hard. I'm a first-generation immigrant myself. I'm the first one to go to college, etc. Immigrants have it hard, no doubt about it. But everything else considered, and I'm not necessarily referring to your family here at all. I'm talking about the white privilege issue. No one is ever held back because they're white, and that's what white privilege basically means. No one's ever looked at and said, oh, you're white, you can't do this, you can't, typically, generally, as a generalization as to how wealth and other things get generated in this society. So I think that's what white privilege means. But anyway, we could talk about that.
Well, let me first, Elka, Sean, or Alice, do any of you have questions or comments you want to make?
I apologize. Follow up on my primary, secondary sources. I could say a couple things on that. I know that it's not, I don't know, like that's something that I learned in school when I made this really unpopular choice to study anthropology. And I would say that, like, if I'm focusing on a primary source, I still, there's still a grain of salt there that is, what Danny and Sean were talking about, and knowing that the mind is a really tricky, weird tool that can, the memory is not a thing that is reliable. I mean, at my job, I'm constantly pulling medical histories out of people and trying to back up what they're saying with the medical record. And it's constant that the memory is not right. And, a thing that you remember your doctor saying in an office is like, just, that's it. That's all it is. It's a thing you remember your doctor saying in an office. So, I would say that in my analysis of news as either a primary or a secondary source, there is another layer of analysis where I say, okay, if this is a primary source, what is their bias? you know, and an example there would be with the Black Lives Matter protest last summer. There's a protagonist, he's known in the media as the, what do they call him, like the warlord or whatever. I can't remember his name, but they called him this warlord leader guy.
I know who you're talking about. I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. And I would say it's my white privilege that I don't remember his name. That, you know, I was following his stuff. But then also I had another primary source, Nikita Oliver and Olua Ijiomo, and they were commenting and saying about the warlord guy. I can't remember his name. Yeah, he's also like
Raz Simone. Raz
Simone. Yeah, he has a little domestic violence issue going on, and you know, like there's, I watch Raz Simone and I read Raz Simone, but I also know that he has some flaws, shall we say, that are also standing, and you know, so a primary source is like, yeah, I want the camera that's there. I want to know that what I'm looking at is actually a representation of what is, you know, being reported on. And then I do also appreciate it, and as far as secondary sources go, like I love Rachel Maddow. Like I love nuanced interpretations of information. Sean, what you're saying about the expert coming on, yes, absolutely. Somebody who doesn't have their skin in the game, like you want to hear about it. I would counterpoint and say those people do have skin in the game, like they are being paid to make those comments and they have a relationship to maintain. And that definitely involves saying things or not saying things that they know they should not say. So maybe they are saying things that are agreeable, but trust me, there's a lot that they're not saying that they know would not be agreeable. And there is that skin.
Right. Alice?
Just one thought I had about the white privilege. And, you know, I believe that there's a thing as white privilege, but I also bristle when they make the leap to, you don't believe in white privilege, then you're a white supremacist. And, you know, that's equivalent to a Nazi and you should die. We go down there so quickly. There's other layers of complexity to the problem, including the fact that there's a whole subgroup of people who are afraid of losing their white, male-centered, Christian, heterosexual, you know, lives. It's like the Native Americans. You're coming in and you're, you know, taking away our way of thinking and our way of living. And yeah, they're going to bristle. You know, you have to be able to do both, to stand up for something, but empathize at the same time. And I find that that's very hard to do. And the way our media is set up, it forces a split. Are you on this side or that side? Do you agree with them or do you agree with me? And I've gotten myself into so much trouble by, especially on Facebook, by trying to, you know, present another element or another, you know, some nuanced version of something and being jumped on. Like, are you on their side? And yeah, no, not really. Well, maybe a little bit.
Right.
It's, I don't know. I'm really enjoying this nuanced conversation.
Sean, do you have anything to add?
Just a thought. You know, I was thinking about facts and what we're defining as facts and where we get our facts from, and I was thinking back to when we were kids and the history books they were all vetted by the state, approved by the, you know, educational organization. You know, and I think, well, what was the, you know, Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. That was a fact. Every kid that went through grammar school and learned history knew that as a fact. And that's what we were all taught. And that was the true facts. But it's not true. We all know that wasn't the case. Today, we know that it wasn't the case. And so I guess, you know, we determine, even though you might research an issue and get to what you think is the facts, you don't know. It depends on who wrote the history. I guess if you look at American history, an American history book written by an Anglo-Saxon, and then looked at an American history book, if we had one written by a Native American, the history would be very different if you were looking at the same time period and the incidents that occurred during that time. And so it really is, there's a that arc of perception that and you really have to, and people, like you said, I think we said earlier, that people gravitate towards the ones that reinforce your beliefs or what you want to believe. So that's, I don't know if that's a final thought or not, but
I would love to ask
something that
Alice
occurred.
a question.
Go for it.
Alice, in your psychological profession, do you have any explanation for that phenomenon of what are we talking about? Like being I guess like having blinders on, the way in which our brain needs us to have blinders in order to like survive.
Yeah,
Like,
I think there's
like human evolution, how this happened.
yeah,
How
I think that's a great question. I tend to think of psychological differences as the new prejudice, because we come by our views the same way we come by our racial history, our religious history, our cultural history, genetics, the way we were raised, the way our thinking styles, our parenting, our traumas, our, what we've been through in our lives. So we come out believing something and we own it, and it matters to us. It's our identity, and it's like our skin color. You can't take it away. And I think we attack each other in ways that just don't work, because you're accusing someone of their identity.
Right. It's your identity.
Yeah. Find some other way to hear and be heard without that head-on collision against your identity. It feels like a prejudice to me. That one that's alive and well, and that we're all, free to have.
Thank you.
All right. On that note, we will wrap this up. And I will see you all at the same time in 1 week. Oh, Jay.
Just say goodbye.
Oh, okay.
And the Facebook page.
Does anyone
You're on
have
Facebook. Just
logistical questions? Before
Dialogue with Dignity Facebook page.
Dialogue with Dignity Facebook page. You can see it on Adrian's window. It's facebook.com/groups/dialogue with dignity. And so anyone is welcome to go there and chat with people who've been watching this today. This video will go up on YouTube sometime tomorrow, probably. And that's it. Anyone have any logistical questions before we go? Okay, great. I will be in touch, and I'll see you next Sunday.
Bye-bye.
Right.